Welcome to another edition of Drugs, Crime, and Politics, brought to you by the Drug Policy Forum of Texas. Good evening. I'm your host, Buford Terrell. With me tonight, as usual, is my colleague, Clayton Jones.
Good evening. Clayton. How you doing?
And behind us, you see what might be the world's largest doobie, except it's fake. But it was part of the decorations on Houston NORML's entry in the art car parade this last weekend, and we'll be showing some pictures in one of the breaks tonight and talking more about the parade since then. I guess probably the biggest things to hit the news this week came out of the Supreme Court with a goodie and a really baddie. The baddie was the case out of Kentucky that said that if the police in the hallway smelled marijuana, they were justified in a no-knock, no-warrant break-in, raid, and search to prevent evidence from being destroyed. Alito wrote the opinion, and it's just more proof that he doesn't have any business being on that court in the first place. Part of it is this is just part of the continual erosion of the Bill of Rights that has been going on ever since really since Berger was Chief Justice of the court, but particularly during the Chief Justiceships of Rehnquist and Roberts. So there was an extremely good dissent in the case by Justice Ginsburg. The only bright side of that picture I can see was that about a week or two earlier, the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts, looking at state law, said that since Massachusetts had decriminalized possession of small amounts of marijuana, and that anyone in the state, any adult, could possess up to an ounce, subject only to a $100 civil fine, not a criminal prosecution, that the police making a traffic stop who smelled marijuana in the car did not have probable cause or reasonable suspicion to believe that criminal activity was going on, and they weren't justified in making a search. The idea being that possession of a small amount of marijuana is legal, it's not a crime, it's not evidence of a crime.
Right.
So that's another reason for pushing for some sort of legalization at the state level. I think you were griping about that opinion a little bit earlier.
Oh yeah, I mean, now it just kind of opens the door for a policeman to say, I know there are bad people that live there, I think I smell marijuana. And they can bust in.
Well, it's been going that way, as I say, ever since the Berger
It just
court.
justifies what they're doing more.
And the sad part is the Fourth Amendment is supposed to mean something. A couple of shows ago, may have been last show, my read of the book of the week here, the one that I said was number one on my all-time must-read list for everybody, The Rights of Americans, I believe it is. It's got probably the best description of what has happened to our now almost totally missing rights against searches and seizures over the past roughly 30 years. So, once again, I urge that you read that book. And the other case I think has a jolly upside to it. And the court ruled, and I believe this one was 8-1, that California's prisons are so overcrowded that they unconstitutionally violate the Eighth Amendment rights against cruel and unusual punishment. The state of California must reduce its prison population by 33,000 inmates and do it within 2 years. Right now they're kind of squirming around. They're looking. Texas ran into the same situation 30 years or so ago with the Ruiz case. We made a horrible mistake at the time because, in effect, what the state did then and what California is talking about doing is taking the guys that have been in there the longest and letting them out first, really no matter what crime they did. So you get someone who's been in there 20 years on a multiple murder rap, he may get out first.
Before somebody that was growing a plant.
Yes. And what I'm advocating to my friends in California, and which I think we need to be looking at, is that the legislature, or even the governor to the extent that he has power over the process, first in selecting inmates for release, needs to look at those that are there for mere non-violent commercial transactions in drugs, and then get the legislature to step in and change the state statutes so that simply buying and selling and possessing by adults is not a state crime. Now, even if you don't like drug traffickers, that doesn't let anyone go free, because after all, these things are still violations of the federal law, and if the feds want to, they can come in and arrest all of the cocaine sellers. They don't have to use the states to do their dirty work for them. And although California is the one that's caught in the crack right now, there are several other states around the country that are looking at more or less the same thing. They're forced with either greatly expanding their prison budgets and building more prisons, or in many cases figuring out some way to cut costs of prisons, which normally means letting someone else out. And once again, I think the way to do it is look at the kind of offense the person is locked up for, not simply letting out those that have been there the longest, who are usually the ones that committed the more dangerous crimes to begin with.
I don't know. I think you're kind of right. Nonviolent drug offenders should be the first ones to come out.
Yeah, and so if they get out, so they sell another 5 or 6 grams of cocaine, big deal. If the feds don't like it, let them lock them up.
Well, isn't that what Maine's kind of saying right now? With their proposing the bill to withdraw all state penalties on marijuana?
Well, yeah, and
isn't that exactly the same thing that Maine's already trying to do?
They're talking about it for marijuana only.
Yes.
And I've been thinking recently, and unfortunately, we and everyone else gets caught up in words. So we have people talking about the state should decriminalize or legalize drugs, and everyone gets all into Twitter. We shouldn't be talking about that. We should be talking either about removing state penal sanctions from drug sales, or talk about leaving enforcement of the drug laws up to the federal government. Just because the state says we don't want to play the federal government's game doesn't necessarily mean that the state approves of the behavior they're talking about. Back in the days of alcohol prohibition, it took less than 2 years for the state of New York to say, we're not going to play if the federal government wants to enforce prohibition in New York. They can come do it, but they can come do it without the New York police helping. By 1933, when prohibition was repealed, over 10 states had said that. And states can say the same thing about marijuana or all drugs, that we don't care what the federal government wants to do, but they can do it without our help.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Sounds like a good remedy to me.
And I don't know, did you watch Channel 11's news last night?
No.
Well, they had a story, and it was very poorly done, I'll have to say this, looking at the number of Border Patrol agents who have corruptly assisted drug or people smugglers. And according to this story, since 2005, 122 border enforcement agents have been caught assisting smugglers in one way or another, and 50 have been caught in possession of controlled substances. And they quoted 2 of our more extreme, totally lame-brained Congress critters who just got all in a flutter and went waving their arms in the air and said, "This is horrible, we've got to do something about it."
Mr. Culberson?
Mr. Culberson happened to be one of them. But the thing that no one bothered to point out is that this isn't just an isolated incident. It doesn't have anything to do with the fact that this agency has grown a lot and probably is not as well. What they neglected to point out is that this is a necessary and totally predictable side effect of any kind of prohibition law and any kind of close border enforcement. If you go back and look at alcohol prohibition again, people used to talk about the entire Chicago police force being on Al Capone's payroll. Elliot Ness, who came in with his accountants from IRS, was such an unusual bunch because they weren't taking money from Capone that they became known as the Untouchables. And it didn't stay that way. They got touched. We can even go back another 100, 150 years before that, when Britain imposed a prohibitively high tariff on French watchworks coming into Britain, trying to make the price on French watches so high that people would buy British watches instead. Guess what? Their customs officials went on the take too. It happens anytime you've got a border crossing and high prohibition generated prices. We want to get rid of corruption in the Border Patrol. We get rid of drug prohibition.
What was it? 2 weeks ago, there was a border patrolman that was caught with 75 pounds of 750 pounds of marijuana in his vehicle.
Yeah, and you can go back and look, and you know, there's not a month goes by, probably not a week goes by, that there's not another story somewhere across the United States about some police officer, prosecutor, judge who gets caught working for or accepting money from drug smugglers of one kind or another. My favorite story here really involves the Texas prisons. And in the 90s, the Texas prisons decided they were going to outlaw tobacco smoking in the state prisons. So they passed a law making it illegal for a prisoner to smoke in prison. Immediately, the prison guards started smuggling cigarettes into them. At that time, you could buy a pack of 20 generic cigarettes for $3. The price inside prison was $5 for a third of a cigarette. That's about $300 a pack. And a $25,000 prison guard, that's an awful lot of temptation. Mm-hmm. And it's still going on. We have a phone call. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes. My name's Dennis Hancock.
Yes, sir.
Houston, Texas, and I want to know what kind of program this is?
This is a program where we talk about primarily the laws about drugs and the use and buying and selling of drugs and the problems with those laws.
Yeah. Well, how do you stop that type of problem?
The way you stop that type of problem is you talk to your legislators and your congressmen and tell them you want to get rid of the crazy drug laws. And you keep saying that till they change the law.
All right, that's all I had to ask for today.
Okay, thank you. So let's take a break now, and we'll see you in a minute or two.
Moving too fast to take time for the things you really enjoy? Positiva can help bring back the pleasure of activities you used to love. Some of the highlights of Positiva may include increased appetite, lower blood pressure, and significantly lower stress. People who take Positiva discover a whole new outlook on life. Positiva may not be right for everyone. Consult your physician today. Positiva. Now you have a choice, a positive choice. For more information, visit us online at www.normal.org.
These are to do only have connected to drugs.
Yeah, that's what I say, yeah.
And
we're back. Thank you for joining us. Drugs, Crime, and Politics. Clayton was marching in that art car parade right by the emergency response vehicle you saw, and you seemed pretty enthusiastic about the crowd response.
you know, I've been doing that parade with the group for a few years. And when I first started doing it years ago, people, they were out there applauding, but it wasn't this year. It was like the whole way around. It was a pep rally for marijuana. it wasn't a few people, half the people. I'd say 2/3 to 3/4 of the people were really making a lot of noise as we went by.
Yeah.
Attitude's changing.
Attitude, and the funny thing is, I don't know if you've ever heard the expression, the tipping point.
Mm-hmm.
That there's something can teeter back and forth, but there's some point where just the slightest little touch is enough to tip it all the way over. And frankly, at least as far as marijuana is concerned, I think we're sitting on that tipping point right now. Now, I don't know whether Maine will be the first or if Oregon's going to come in on it, but I still think some state is going to legalize marijuana this year. Which one it'll be, I don't know.
Well, Rhode Island is kind of fed up with all the laws, too.
Yeah, and they're another place, Rhode Island, where the U.S. Attorney has been getting a little boisterous and trying to be heavy-handed and shove his nose in to the state legislative business where it just doesn't belong at all.
Mm-hmm. Federal government should be totally separated from the state.
Well, not exactly. But federal
Influence.
officers should not be allowed to use their federal office to exert influence on state political processes. Now, if the federal government finds a state highway patrolman carrying 3 kilos of cocaine in his patrol car as an errand boy for a drug lord, yeah, the feds can intervene and arrest him.
Oh,
But that's a little bit different from the U.S. Attorney writing letters to the state legislature saying, we don't like the law you're proposing, so we're going to be big and mean and have a tantrum if you pass that law. That's improper.
that's what I meant to say, is exactly what you said.
Okay. Oh, tonight's book is a little bit different. Tonight we have Joint Ventures by Trish Regan. And the subtitle of the book is Inside America's Almost Legal Marijuana Industry. Now, Ms. Regan is the author of the 2 CNBC specials, Marijuana Inc. and Marijuana USA. And from the way the book reads, I suspect that it's primarily based on the research that was done in preparation of those 2 shows. But on the other hand, since it comes from TV land, it's at a very readable level and in very readable language. She looks at some of the medical marijuana businesses that have grown up in Colorado. She looks at some of the growers in Northern California. The thing that I find useful about it, it's probably the most informative general description of decriminalization that has taken place in Portugal and the way several of the Latin American companies have followed along, Mexico, Brazil, to name the 2 of them. A couple of pretty good sections at the end about the prospects for legalization. So it's a quick read, it's an interesting read, and at a very basic level, it's quite informative. So I would say Joint Ventures by Trish Regan is well worth reading, and I'll even accept the pun in their title. And tonight I want to do something a little different with show and tell. And it's a slightly different approach to drug abuse. In some ways, all of the so-called problems we have with marijuana and stimulants and opiates are totally dwarfed by the social problems that we're presented with nicotine, especially in the form of cigarettes. We still have around 400,000 people a year who die from tobacco-related illnesses, and quite often those illnesses are preceded by extended periods of reduced capacity in one form or another. Just the thoughts of the medical bills and reduced income created by tobacco smoke are just almost impossible to calculate. And because of the fairly long history of tobacco use, we took a different approach with tobacco. We didn't prohibit it. About a dozen states tried around 1900 to 1920, but all of them dropped their tobacco prohibition laws pretty quickly. What we did instead was, once we discovered the health risk, was put limits on advertising, limits on sales to minors, strong educational campaigns, and tobacco use has been reduced from something a majority of adults did down to a little over 20%. But there's been a lot of work in the past few years about trying a different approach, and this is substituting straight nicotine for the nicotine laced with the really bad health-causing problems in burning tobacco leaves. And this week, I picked up one of the latest examples of that technology. I have here an e-cigarette. It looks a whole lot like and is about the same size as a regular cigarette, although it's cold and metallic and way too heavy. And it works much the same way. You inhale it, you exhale a vapor, you get a dose of nicotine, although without any of the carcinogens. Although I've got to admit, I've never seen a real cigarette that burned green instead of red. This is, I guess you'd call a harm reduction approach, in that it keeps me being a nicotine addict, but it reduces the health risk associated with it. One of the weird things about this is I really don't know what kind of risks I'm taking. Normally, with a drug delivery device, which is what this is, the FDA would have insisted upon extreme testing of it. The manufacturer would need to prove the safety of it. There would have to be a disclosure of all of the things that make it up, all of the elements of it. But because the FDA didn't want to get involved with tobacco several years back, and the Supreme Court said that obviously Congress did not intend to regulate tobacco with the Food and Drug Act, they said that the FDA has no jurisdiction over tobacco. The result is this cute, clever little device is manufactured in China. I bought this one in a convenience store. It has not been tested by the FDA or any government agency. It's manufactured in China, and I really have no idea what I'm putting in my lungs when I inhale it. It's a really, really funny approach to marketing something. So let's take another break, and I'll see you again in a minute or two.
I got a friend that he started.
The whole idea of a drug-free America and zero tolerance really doesn't make much sense, does it? So it does make sense, however, to find ways to reduce the harms associated with drugs. And that's what I want to talk about.
To start thinking about whether it is really laws that make the difference on whether people use drugs or not.
Al Capone didn't shoot people because he was intoxicated.
Right, exactly.
Those people are not fighting over drugs, they're fighting over money.
Drug laws have no basis in science. Drug laws are based on politics and money.
So there's this unholy symbiosis between, on the one hand, those who are selling illegal drugs, the drug lords, if you will, and on the other side, the drug warriors.
War on drugs isn't working, and that, if anything, it's just making what we call the drug problem a lot worse.
I remember just going in, taking a small area of my community and for all practical purposes cordoning it off, completely cleaning it up, using some pretty sophisticated techniques, trampling all over the edges of the Constitution to do so. But I mean really cleaning it up and getting all of the dope dealers out of there. And to my dismay, 90 days later, I had a Haitian group to move in from downstate. I had the Miami boys to move in from Jacksonville, and they were shooting machine guns and beating people mercilessly, and I wanted my old dope dealers back.
Hi, I'm Ethan Nadelman, the founder and executive director of the Drug Policy Alliance. You're watching Drugs, Crimes, and Politics. Hope you enjoy it.
We're back. Welcome back to Drugs, Crime, and Politics. Clayton has been filling me in on some of the newer cases of police corruption involving drugs. I was telling him a few stories. One thing that was endemic in the New York Police Department several years ago was that police would have search warrants go search a place looking for drugs. If they found drugs or drug money, they would turn in just enough of what they found to justify charging a maximum felony, and anything over that amount went into the raiding officers' pockets for their own personal profit or amusement, and it's still going on.
Oh yeah. I've got a friend in Fort Bend that says that when he was busted in January, $3,400 wasn't on the police report. That's not in his house.
Yeah.
So it's still going on.
Yeah. Well, and as I was saying, historically, if we go back and look during the 13 years of alcohol prohibition, over 30% of the federal revenue agents were either fired, forced to resign, or convicted because of corruption involving dealings with illegal alcohol. In the middle 1930s, the Secretary of the Treasury, who had jurisdiction at that time, had to step in, take control of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, and fire a full third of all of the agents in the country. In the 1960s, the same thing had to happen with what was then the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, and over 30% of the New York office, which had over half the agents in the country, were fired because of corruption. And less than a month after that, the Chief Supervisory Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs in Florida, not just the street level cop, but the supervisor of all of the cops in the state, was fired for taking money from drug dealers.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that goes along with trying to enforce a law that doesn't stop transactions, it just generates lots and lots of money.
There was a police chief right here in Texas this past week got sentenced to 20 years. He was guarding shipments of cocaine coming through his town.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the Soviet Union tried to keep its people from finding out what people in the West were thinking. They made it against the law to own or possess or look at videotapes from the U.S. or Europe or Japan. They even went so far they didn't just make it a crime to possess one of them. They actually had their engineers develop a separate videotaping system for the Soviet Union that couldn't play back or see any of the Western tapes. It was more than the difference between VHS and Beta. And guess what? The Western videotapes started showing up inside of Russia in that fancy Russian format. Corruption happens when you have prohibition. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
It's not about what you were just speaking about. I wanted to know about that big joint strapped down behind you. What is the visual art? Or
okay, thank you. That's our parade doobie. As we were saying at the first break, Houston NORML had its compassion care ambulance in the art car parade this last weekend, and
it was strapped on the top of the vehicle and it was smoldering the whole way through.
Yeah, tell us about it. Clayton was there.
Well, it was just on top of the van, and it was strapped down, and we had a little smoke deal in there, and it was smoking the whole way we're on the route.
Yeah. Now, it's not quite up to the quality of the visual aids in some of the old Cheech and Chong movies, but they had a little bigger budget too.
It cost hell to fill that thing up, I'll tell you.
Okay, so anything else caught your mind recently?
No, it's just that there is a lot of police corruption throughout the country when it comes to drugs. It's not in any one area where the drugs are heavier, like Texas or Florida.
And it's not any particularly one kind of, but I keep saying that it's something that always happens when you try to impose a prohibition. One prohibition that most American states added in the 1890s to 1900 period was they passed laws prohibiting prostitution. And what happened since then, I don't know of a single town in the United States without prostitution. It didn't stop it, it didn't start it. But I also don't know of many towns in the United States except one county in Nevada where prostitution is legal, where sex workers don't get assaulted, beat up, robbed, raped, and it's frequently done by police officers. One sociological study I looked at was looking at prostitutes in Chicago that worked the streets. One survey of them showed that approximately 3% of the tricks these women did in the course of their business were done for free to on-duty policemen, and the women and the police both viewed it as just simply a routine business tax. So this isn't a drug particular thing.
Oh, no.
This is a prohibition kind of thing.
Rhode Island had what happened with two consenting adults behind closed doors was their business until that Craigslist murders that was going on back east about a year ago from that doctor. And then they changed their laws. It was the only other state that didn't have hard prostitution laws.
Well, Rhode Island has got a rather strange history anyway. Roger Williams was run out of Massachusetts because he had the radical belief that, generally speaking, people should be allowed to do or believe what they wanted to do, and particularly to worship the way they wanted to worship. And the Boston Puritans couldn't stand even the idea of this, so they chased him out of town, and he formed Rhode Island. And for about 200 years, it was noted as being the most free, the most liberal part of the United States, and this is just part of it. They're one of the places right now that's trying to get their medical marijuana situation running properly,
well,
and they're being threatened strongly by the U.S. Attorney there.
They had three organizations that were set up growing marijuana, and they were going to do the distribution.
Yeah.
And the feds came in and they shut them down this last couple of months.
Yeah.
None of the states want to have their state employees put in federal prison.
Well, you know, and I'm not sure that a state really can order an employee to break a federal law. Now, you can tell a state employee that he does not have to help the feds enforce the federal law unless he's subject to a court order or something equivalent. But you can't tell him, just ignore the federal law and do what you want to do, that we said it's okay, so the feds doesn't matter. That doesn't work. This concept of nullification has never been part of American law. It's been tried twice historically. In 1861, 11 of the states decided to nullify federal laws and withdraw from the Union. They lost the resulting Civil War rather badly. About 30 years before that, South Carolina tried to nullify a federal tariff on imported goods. President Andrew Jackson mobilized the army and sent troops down to South Carolina. The South Carolinians backed down and said, oops, we'll obey the law, thank you, rather quickly. So this idea that state governments can nullify the federal law just is utter blatant nonsense on a shingle. And I don't care who tells you that they have the right to nullify federal law, they're just absolutely wrong. But a state does not have to use its own personnel and own employees as surrogate federal law enforcement officers. So the state of Texas, for instance, could simply say, we're not going to penalize activities connected with marijuana anymore. That means that the Houston or the Idalou police would not arrest anybody for possessing or selling marijuana. The state courts would not try anyone for the offense of selling marijuana. No one would be sent to state prison for selling marijuana. But if the DEA wanted to, they and the FBI and the U.S. Marshals could still come in and arrest someone on the street corner in downtown Houston for violating the federal law against selling marijuana, try them in federal court, and send them to federal prison. And frankly, if the state passed a law saying we're going to run a state lab to test your medical marijuana for purity, then probably the state employees working for that lab would be violating the federal law against possession for the time they had it in their hand. Probably they would be guilty of a conspiracy to violate the federal law, and they could be prosecuted in federal courts. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Buford, hi,
Yes.
this is John.
Yes, John.
I was wondering, when you were talking about that e-cigarette, what's the approximate cost of a unit of a nicotine injection unit like that, and how long does it actually last?
Okay, I'll try to give some answer, John, but frankly, I don't have a lot of good information yet. I bought this one in a convenience store, and the unit, the battery charger, and 2 capsules was $19.95, I think. A packet of 5 replacement capsules, which is in the brown colored part, was about $10 or $12. They say that each one of them is good for about 300 puffs. I have not been using it long enough, don't have enough experience yet to say how many puffs are the equivalent of a cigarette or a pack of cigarettes. I did not shop around. This was more of an impulse purchase on my part. I'd been thinking about it for some time, so I don't know if you can find others at a cheaper price or more expensive elsewhere around town or by mail.
It seemed to me that you would titrate yourself just as you do on it with a cigarette.
Yeah, as I say, you titrate yourself on it. I haven't learned what the point is, but whether the 300 puffs in this one capsule is the equivalent of a carton of cigarettes or 2 packs of cigarettes or a week's worth, I don't know yet. I'll just have to find out by experimentation.
I was telling you, my friend started those on last Christmas, and he just put them all away.
Yeah.
He totally stepped right down with no problems.
Yeah, and that's the goal for most of the people that use them. We're going to take another break and see you in a few minutes.
This week in drug war history, June 1st, 1996. Noted actor and hemp activist Woody Harrelson was arrested and charged with cultivation of less than 5 marijuana plants after he planted 4 industrial hemp seeds in full view of Lee County Sheriff William Kilburn in Lexington, Kentucky. June 3rd, 1876. At the Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia, America's first 100-year birthday bash, fairgoers visit the Turkish Hashish Exposition and toke up in order to enhance their fair experience. June 8, 1993. William F. Buckley in an interview said, "The amount of money and of legal energy being given to prosecute hundreds of thousands of Americans who are caught with a few ounces of marijuana in their jeans simply makes no sense. The kindest way to put it. A sterner way to put it is that it is an outrage and imposition on basic civil liberties and on the reasonable expenditures of social energy." June 11, 2001. The U.S. Supreme Court rules that the use by the police of a thermal imaging device to detect patterns of heat coming from a private home is a search that requires a warrant. June 13, 1994. The RAND Corporation releases a study finding that drug treatment is 7 times more cost-effective than law enforcement for reducing cocaine use. June 14, 2000. Best-selling author, cancer and AIDS patient, and high-profile medical marijuana activist Peter McWilliams is found dead in his Los Angeles, California home. Barred by a federal court order from using marijuana to counteract the extreme nausea caused by his AIDS drugs, McWilliams choked to death on his own vomit slumped on the bathroom floor. His federal prosecutors said they were saddened by his death. June 15, 1998. Random House publishes Mike Gray's Drug Crazy, How We Got Into This Mess and How We Can Get Out. This is Steve Nolan for the Drug Truth Network.
Hey, this is Tommy Chong, and you're watching Drugs, Crime, and Politics.
Inside of the bars.
Wrong in whose viewpoint? We're back to Drugs, Crime, and Politics. I believe the phone rang while we were on break. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
How you guys doing this evening?
Pretty
Very
good.
Okay, that's good, man. I just have a couple of questions.
Okay.
What are the side effects of marijuana usage over long periods of time? And who is experienced enough to form such observations? And is the prescription pill epidemic of today more serious than the crack cocaine eras of the 80s?
Okay. Those are both very good questions. The first question, to the best of my knowledge, except for the possibility of acquiring a prison record, there are no long-term consequences of marijuana use.
I think you said
the Kaiser Permanente Healthcare Organization on the West Coast did a study of several tens of thousands of their members over a 30-year period and found absolutely no significant health differences between those who used marijuana and those who did not use it. The UCLA Medical School Lung Institute, which is probably the leading lung and respiratory scientific body anywhere in the world, says they have never found a case of lung cancer directly attributable to marijuana. As I say, there seem to be no significant major side effects to marijuana use, except for going to jail.
Well, if you overdose, you'll have to sleep a lot.
Yeah, and you might get the munchies and put on a little bit of weight. But even then, according to Kaiser Permanente, you still stay within the same health guidelines as your other colleagues. The current pill phenomenon, I think, to a very large extent, is a result of news media hype. And part of it, to the extent it is a problem, it's a problem of lack of education. What happens is we've been told for a long time that heroin's bad, heroin's going to kill you, but Vicodin is what the dentist gives you when you've got a toothache. No one has bothered to tell anyone that when they get in your body, they're exactly the same damn drug.
One's a little stronger than the other.
Yeah, you got to have more Vicodin to get the same effect. So there's an education problem there. And if you go back and look at the crack cocaine epidemic, so-called, of the 1980s, there never were that many crack users. We've still got a lot of crack users. They may be 0.5% to 1% of the population. The problems that showed up with crack cocaine in the 1980s were not with crack cocaine, but with crack cocaine being bought and sold on an illegal market, on problems between police and crack cocaine dealers, the crack houses. That was primarily because since it was illegal, that was the only way you could get it and consume it. The crack whores, because it was much more expensive, 100 times as much as it would cost legally. Drive-by shootings, it's because it was a cash business and the dealers had a lot of money in their pockets. But in terms of enough cocaine being used to cause significant social problems, I don't think there really were that many. And I sincerely doubt that the cocaine use in the 1980s overall was any greater than it was during the 1920s, when every movie star and every British aristocrat was doing cocaine almost every day. And I think one of the problems that we all have trouble separating out is distinguishing between the problems caused by drug use. And there are some, particularly with the stimulants like cocaine and the amphetamines. And the problems caused by drug prohibition laws. And that includes almost all of the violence, almost all of the corruption, almost all of the neighborhood degradation. In study after study after study that's ever been done, only one drug has ever had use of the drug itself associated with violence or criminal activity. And that one drug is alcohol. People who get drunk get into fights. People who get drunk beat up their significant others. People who get drunk drive recklessly and kill other people. People who get drunk take out their concealed carry gun and shoot it around just for the fun of it. You don't have those kinds of things happening with any other drug.
I have a foolish question.
Okay.
Why isn't alcohol or tobacco on the schedule of DEA's drugs?
The reason why they're not, and you can look at the Supreme Court on this, with alcohol prohibition as a matter of repealed by constitutional amendment in 1933, and with the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act passed in, forget whether it was 1937 or 1938, the Supreme Court said that the intent is clearly obvious that Congress intended for the Food and Drug Administration to have no jurisdiction over alcohol or tobacco. Then when the Controlled Substances Act was passed, it used the same definition of drugs that was used in the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act. And since they have no medical use even pretended for them, that's probably not a bad result. We're just about to run out of time tonight. Any quick last word?
Yes. Please, everybody. It is so important that we sit down and take that 10 minutes to write our legislators and tell them that this drug war needs to end.
And the legislature is in its last week, and they're not going to do anything else to help us out. It's been a lousy year in Austin.
Oh, we got a noodling bill?
We have these private prisons that have now hired lobbyists to go get minimum mandatories and
I began to understand that the 17 or the 19-year-old kid I had in the backseat of my police car was not a criminal at all.
Remove the profit motive. If you remove the profit motive, you can do away with almost all these problems. And how do you do that? Simple. You end prohibition, which can only mean one thing. Legalize drugs. Legalize all drugs.
If we really want to improve our urban neighborhoods, the most important thing that we could do, the single most important thing that we could do, is end the war on drugs.